practical tips. I'd really like you to keep this in mind, not just for mediation, but also for negotiation. So consider who you will be negotiating with, both the other side and internally. Make sure you know your client very well, as much as you can, the nature of their business, their personality, and their risk tolerances. Also understand whatever internal and external pressures they might be feeling, and consider authority. Do you have the requisite authority to sign the deal on the day? Does your client? And also consider the reporting structure or organisational pressures ahead of time. Consider a suitable location as well. Sometimes it is face-to-face on neutral territory, and in other cases, video Zoom is excellent. Would the dispute benefit from the assistance of an interpreter? Now, that's something that you really need to keep in mind. Sometimes parties who have English as their second language can speak English quite fluently, but when it comes time to drafting terms of settlement and reading them and understanding them, or speaking legalese language, it is useful to have an interpreter involved, or a support person, perhaps who can provide financial or emotional counselling along the way. All of these things are very important to consider ahead of a negotiation or mediation for it to be successful. Also, of course, consider a brief chronology, even if it's not to supply to the other side or to the mediator. You'll benefit from having that on hand during the day, as well as key documents. So bring them along. That's again one of the benefits of online, is that very often key documents are readily at hand and people can't say, oh, I didn't bring them with me. So that is a definite upside to online. Also, with your opening statement, keep it short form, keep it to the facts rather than the opinions or assumptions. And remember, they're not submissions, and I'll explain the reasoning for this a bit further on. Also consider ahead of time your client's options for resolution, which I mentioned before. How will it impact them in terms of cost, time and stress? And backlogs and delays are also a thing. So they'll need to factor in the time it'll take to get a resolution, which obviously can be a lot more efficient with mediation. I did also want to mention, be prepared to answer the difficult questions. So this is often forgotten or overlooked, but I found that very useful, particularly when I was starting out as a litigator and negotiator, was to think about what's the worst thing they could possibly ask me on the day of the negotiation or mediation, and be prepared with an answer ahead of time. It'll take a lot of the stress out of things. Okay, so moving on to mediation insights and practical tips. Remember, negotiation is not necessarily an act of war, but rather should be viewed as a journey of discovery. These tips really keep that in mind, and that is, set the tone. Save advocacy for the hearing. Ultimately, you want to influence and convince the other party to agree with you. But in order to do this, they need to hear what you're saying. But to be heard, you first have to build respect and trust. And the best way to do this is to keep content neutral and conciliatory. So don't interrupt or use provocative language, or chest beat or be aggressive or disinterested. Instead, look for ways to build rapport, to disarm them, perhaps by asking questions that show genuine curiosity. Remember, mediation is an opportunity to achieve a resolution of the dispute for your client. It's not a rehearsal for a final hearing, and treating it like a court misses that golden opportunity before you. So if you did, for example, and I see this in mediations, come in with threatening tactics or bluster, you'll likely get the same in return. It won't foster collaborative problem solving. So it's very important to remember that influence and learning come hand in hand. Listen to what's behind their words, because it might provide useful clues or options for resolution. Also consider acknowledgement. If you don't acknowledge you've heard the other party, instead of listening to you when you speak, they'll be working out how to re-put their argument so that this time you'll understand them. And therefore you're losing the opportunity to influence their thinking. So really consider that, making an acknowledgement or a concession, because it can seriously disarm and build rapport, knock the wind out of their sails, so to speak, and reduce the tension. I've seen this happen beautifully in a farm debt mediation where the farmers arrived to the mediation extremely stressed and unable to actually sit in the mediation space comfortably. They were very worried and angry as well, and there was mixed emotions, but they faced losing their family farm, which was handed down through generations, but it was also their livelihood. What was not yet on the table was the fact that they had experienced significant distress during the milk crisis, milk price crisis, but also they'd lost elderly family and had some cancer diagnosis during that time. So it was an incredibly stressful time. So I was new to hearing all of this background information on the day. And when the bank became aware of these particular matters, what they did then was really important to how the tone of the negotiations went. So instead of being anxious and angry, the farmers completely changed. The bank expressed concern, saying, "We can clearly see that things have been tough for you, and we're really sorry that it's been so tough. We're sorry if we could have done things differently or handled it better." I think there'd been some internal changes to the file manager, and that led to mistrust as well between the parties. But effectively, the bank acknowledged their predicament and perhaps the bank's contribution to the situation by not having a consistent point of contact. And that completely changed how things went along from there. So be open-minded and curious. So I've put in here, being creative and flexible and collaborative is extremely important. There may be a solution to the problem you haven't yet considered. So be open to hearing what options there are. There might be an option you've previously dismissed that can be revisited and perhaps adapted. So be prepared to explore all options, even ones that you've thought of before. Don't ask what, consider asking why. Understanding the answer may give way to the solution. So continue to be curious, approaching the negotiation as a mystery to be solved. That might naturally reduce your blind spots in the negotiation too, because you'll become aware of information that perhaps might not have been on the papers prior to the day. Consider the message behind their words. Also, be comfortable with silence. So I know that as litigators or problem solvers, we often have the gift of the gab, but try to sit in that space now and again, because you might find that if you have moments of quiet, that those quiet moments are filled with something that you didn't know. They might qualify their offer or signal a possible solution. Okay, one of my top favourite tips, I'd have to say, is the one that I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to mention again because I think you should keep it up your sleeve, and that is be prepared to answer those tough questions so they don't take you by surprise. Also be aware of your body language. It can speak 1,000 words, so use eye contact to show that you're making a concerted effort to listen to what they're saying, and so that they feel that you are really listening to them. Remember that you're more likely to persuade them if you've built that trust and rapport. So seek to understand before being understood. Now, don't direct your communications. So when I'm saying this, don't direct your communications just to the mediator or the arbitrator, whoever it might be. Try to actually look at the representative and the other party. Also, don't be distracted or inattentive. That's the quickest way to lose somebody. So I recommend putting your pens down, because taking copious notes also builds mistrust. Don't be evasive. So when I said have an answer to the most difficult question, try not to avoid answering it. Answer it as best you can, because again, it will lead to mistrust. And don't dismiss something as their problem. It will be quickly your problem if that happens. I've often seen that to be the case. Also, look for common ground. Invite this collaborative problem-solving tone to the discussions. Some of the ways you can do this is by posing open questions to the other party to encourage that collaborative space. So you might say, well, what do you think would be fair in the circumstances? Or how do you think that this could be resolved? Or tell me a little bit more so that I can better understand this. And if you feel that you're not able to answer, another way to respond is to say, well, consider what you've said and we'll come back to you with something that hopefully we can work with. Okay, so I love that. That's a really great way to say, we've heard you, we're going to try and work with it. And encourage your client to have a voice. I've had a lot of mediations where lawyers are trying to squirrel their clients away in a private room. And look, I'm not saying private sessions are not important. They certainly are. And you do need to get instructions. And sometimes that's private. But I would encourage you to really consider that joint session as giving your client a role to play during that discussion. That will help them buy into the process and also get the buy-in from the other party. I had a really interesting mediation. It was quite a number of years ago now. And there were, I think it was, around 14 retirement village residents. And they were in a dispute with the retirement village owner. And when I arrived at the mediation, there were hordes of people. There were over 10 different lawyers and barristers. And the barrister for the retirement village owner quickly whooshed him away into a private room and said to me, we're not having joint session, we're going straight into negotiation and we're going to do shuttle and we're going to do it in private sessions. And I thought, that's not really what my process would be, but let me, tell me more about why you're concerned about that, having a joint session and let's explore that further. And the retirement village owner said, look, I'm just incredibly embarrassed. I grew up on this retirement village. My dad was the original owner. I grew up with most of these people being part of my life, so I know them. But also I'm really embarrassed that things have escalated this far and I probably could have communicated better with them and I wished it hadn't got to this point. And I said to him, look, I think that is having already heard from the retirement village residents, I think that's a really important message for you to communicate in open session. It's not necessarily saying that you agree with them in relation to the dispute, but it's an acknowledgement that I think would be useful for them to hear. And in the end, the barrister agreed to let's give this a go and we'll start with a joint session where his client has a voice. And honestly, it was beautiful what happened. The residents all started to talk to him about the way things used to be and how much they'd missed him and that they were also sorry that it had got to this point. And it completely changed the tone of the negotiations. So don't be afraid of giving your client a role to play. Another thing is use your mediator. So, at this negotiation stage, sometimes your mediator can assist you with difficult dynamics and perhaps assist with insight into what's going on in the other room. But it can also help you with any difficulties that you might be facing within your room. So invite the mediator's assistance if it's not forthcoming. It might also make sure that you avoid making the fatal mistake of putting forward a proposal that the other side finds offensive, which can then derail negotiations. So the mediator might be able to provide their insight into that. Another good thing to do with your mediator is pass your ideas on to the mediator. If you have a brilliant light bulb moment, but you're concerned that the other party is going to take offence or not engage with it because it's your idea, then give it to the mediator and say, look, this is something might be worth exploring, and it can be put forward as a mediator proposal. So this can de-escalate things and help flush out a possible solution. As I said, if you've got difficult dynamics in your room, sometimes soliciting the mediator's opinion can change the vibe because the mediator is considered neutral in the eyes of all. Well, hopefully that's what it should be anyway. Also consider the mediator to find out about the ZOPA, which is the zone for possible agreement. But the mediator could give you an indication that, yeah, you're in the ballpark or not.